Do you read comics or graphic novels? If you do, have you ever heard someone say, "I'm not really into comics," or "graphic novels aren't real reading"? And if you don't read them, maybe you're in one of those two camps, which is okay, as long as you keep an open mind. Because today we're going to be talking about what comics can do that other forms of media, like regular books, movies, and TV can't do, and why it matters. First, a quick disclaimer. For the purpose of this video, I will be referring to comics and graphic novels as comics, movies and TV as shows, and traditional novels as books. With that out of the way, let's get started with a quick definition of comics. Comics theorist Scott McCloud has a great one in his book, Understanding Comics. He defines comics specifically as juxtaposed pictorial images in deliberate sequence. Comics also often, but not always, contain words to go along with the pictures. All of the comics we'll be looking at today fall into this category. They also all come highly recommended by yours truly. One great, and perhaps obvious, advantage of comics over books is their ability to include a greater wealth of detail without endless description. You may remember how the books you read in school managed to take up an entire page describing a tree branch or something. With comics, you can achieve detail in a much more user-friendly format. Of course, that's not to say that comic creators don't have to be judicious with their detail, but the chance of your reader getting bored of this is a lot lower than them getting bored of this. Speaking of visualizations, have you ever had an awesome image of a character in your head after reading a book, only to have the movie completely destroy it by spoon-feeding you everything it thinks you should know about them? On the other hand, I've also had the experience of not being able to picture a book character no matter what I do. Comics are the perfect middle ground for this dilemma. They give you enough information to let you visualize the characters, but not so much that you aren't doing any of the work. You get to decide how they sound, the nuances of their movement, and even what they look like if the style is simple and/or not in color. Here's another thing. As kids, we're taught that books with pictures are childish, and that books with no pictures are more advanced. When we read our first book with no pictures, that's seen as a huge accomplishment, which is honestly unfortunate.
How can you read this? There's no pictures.
But pictures can often add a lot to words, and vice versa, something that comics take full advantage of. One way to examine this is to look at graphic novels that were directly adapted from a book. Take Speak, for instance, by Laurie Halse Anderson, a book about a sexual assault survivor learning to find her voice. It has been transformed into a graphic novel through the art of Emily Carroll. Now, I don't know if this is quite on the level of liking a movie more than the book, but I actually liked the graphic novel more than the original, and here's why. Let's take a look at the original first. This is the climax of the novel, where the main character is forced to face her attacker while locked in a supply closet. It's good! The pace is fast, and it fits the scene. It is emotional writing, and there is enough detail to get the message across. But now look at the same scene in the graphic novel. Notice how the words are presented. They are not just words, they have become part of the art. They make the scene that much more dynamic. Of course, this type of word integration is not a requirement for comics, but it is something that only comics could pull off this successfully. Another thing to notice here is the expressions of the characters. Character expressions have always been one of my favorite parts of visual storytelling. One of my favorite scenes in the Japanese action manga Attack on Titan is this one here. By the way, Japanese comics are read like this. As far as I remember, these characters aren't even named in the manga, and yet this page has such a huge impact due to its illustrations. The distraught look in this character's eyes is so memorable that I knew exactly what I was looking for this example, despite not having touched this manga in quite some time. There's also just something special about this not being a moving image that makes it so much more effective. You don't need to actually hear the gunshot to hear it. The image and the shape of this text tell you everything you need to know. The blood suspended in midair freezes this moment in time forever, which I think just makes it all the more haunting. Okay, so a picture is worth 1,000 words. Maybe you didn't need me to tell you that. So now you may be thinking, okay, but what about movies and TV? They're visual too, especially animated movies. Can't they do the expression thing? Well, I agree. But there's something else, something comics have that even shows don't. Space. Okay, not that kind of space. By nature, comics exist in this fourth dimension that can be directly manipulated by the creator. By changing the size, shape, and location of panels, comic artists can create unique effects that don't really come across in other forms of media. I mean, you don't exactly see shows changing their aspect ratio after every shot, or putting brakes on the screen. That would be extremely distracting, but comics are able to do it completely naturally. Look back at the scene from Attack on Titan. These lines break up the panel for a transition effect. Remember, the next page is this way. But unlike a smooth fade that might occur in a show, this one is choppy, reflecting the turmoil present in the scene. Here's an example of how panel shape affects meaning from the graphic novel version of The Handmaid's Tale. In this scene, the main character finds her best friend by happenstance in an illicit club after being separated for a long time. All of the panels on this page are rectangular, as most panels are, except this one, when they embrace. It's a circle. Here, it represents unity, comfort, and intimacy. The circle closes in on them, and they even extend past its frame, emphasizing the closeness of their embrace, and by extension, their relationship. When it comes to books and shows, the way you consume them is very linear, even if there are multiple things happening at the same time. Books and shows have ways of conveying this idea, like alternating chapters and parallel cutting, but these are only an illusion of simultaneity. The events may be happening like this, but you still have to read them or watch them like this. However, comics bring you much closer to experiencing concurrent events as they actually are. Of course, you still technically have to read them one panel at a time, but once you move from one panel to another, the first one doesn't just go away like when one movie scene changes to the next. Instead, we get to experience them as a whole. Descender is one of my favorite comic series. It is a sci-fi adventure about robots. What's not to love, right? A part in Volume 4 illustrates what I said about simultaneity. In this section, we have child androids fighting, a dude and a cyborg lady about to get it on, and two people trying to escape from an enemy ship, all at the same time. Yes, you have to examine each panel one at a time at first, but once you've done that, it's easy to take a step back and look at all of them, registering them as events that are happening at the same time. Another concept is at play here though, and that is panel location. Throughout this whole sequence, which lasts 16 pages, the fighting and escape sequences sometimes flip whether they are on the top or bottom of the page, but the sex scene is always in the middle. Most of the story so far has been very chaotic and high stakes for all of the characters involved. So I think this placement represents how these two characters have found a moment of intimacy in the middle of turmoil. Literally. In comics, each panel exists in the context of the panels that surround it in a very physical sense. This is why it's so infuriating to read comics via Kindle, because they do this thing where they only show you one panel at a time, essentially putting blinders on the thing that makes comics special. Of course, I barely scratched the surface of all the examples I could have provided on these cool things comics can do. But that video could be a week long, so I hope these will do for today. Comics are a great and important form of media. They're great for reluctant readers because they are, in fact, real reading. There are still words, for one, and you still have to follow the plot, keep up with characters, and understand messages, just like in a regular novel. So no matter how old you are, if you don't read comics, you should start. Just look up comics in a genre of book or movie that you like. There's 100% something out there for you, I guarantee it. As communication professor Greg Smith points out, forms of media do not exist in a vacuum. A medium is a hybrid blend of other media. Comics are a mix of storytelling through words, as well as still illustration. They are pictures driven by words and words driven by pictures. However, they are more than just these two mediums thrown into a blender. They take the two and marry them, adding a layer of depth that neither could do on their own. Think about it. If all the bases were covered by books and shows, we wouldn't even need comics. And yet, here they are. Comics are a completely unique way to experience stories, and by extension, the world. And I have confidence that they will continue to serve this purpose, surprising and delighting readers for generations to come.